I am Davon Love. I am the Director of Public Policy of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, and I am in support of the repeal of the Maryland Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. So in the issue of police brutality, there are often attempts to tinker around the edges. And I think what we need now, just given all of what's going on, that it's clear to me, and I think it's clear to many other people, that what is necessary is a repeal of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. That really gets at the heart of police accountability in Maryland. So one of the major problems with the Maryland Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights is that it allows for police officers to investigate themselves when alleged to have engaged in wrongdoing. And that, just at a very basic level, is problematic. Police officers have a professional interest in shielding from the public wrongdoing. And so that just creates a situation where any reasonable expectation of transparency is null and void. It's a labor agreement that's codified in a state law. So much of what is in the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights are things that typically are negotiated between a collective bargaining unit and management, right? So, when you think about, for instance, how discipline is carried out, discipline is something that the LEOBR spells out, the process for disciplining police officers. The public doesn't have any meaningful mechanisms for participation in the way in which officers are disciplined. Police officers have 5 business days before they're required to make a statement on the record pertaining to the incident of alleged misconduct. So those are the kind of protections that undermine the ability for there to be any real public confidence in the fact that law enforcement will not hide the kind of information that the community needs to be able to hold the institution of law enforcement accountable. It basically takes away the ability for the community to task their elected officials to advocate for a process of investigation that satisfies our ability to feel like law enforcement is accountable to us. I think it's important that when we think about this advocacy around repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, that we're not, making the argument, those of us who advocate for it, that, police officers should not have any rights at all, or that police should not have the ability to have, protections that public sector employees have. What we're saying is that the people for whom the police should be accountable to need to be able to be involved in helping to set the standards for what those mechanisms are. So allowing the general public to be able to make anonymous complaints against officers who've engaged in misconduct, we have to be clear that the police as an institution is a very powerful institution. In many situations, it's the police officer's word against the individual person. And it makes sense for people to not trust the ability for the system to treat them equally to the way that police officers get treated. And so when you think about the ways in which law enforcement is able to retaliate against those for whom it sees to be in its ire, it's important that, the ability to have anonymous complaints against law enforcement officials provide an additional avenue for the public to give information that can be used to hold police accountable. The issue of police brutality is not a new issue. Even when we look at, in October of 1966 in Oakland, California, the formation of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, one of the major things that inspired the formation of the Black Panther Party was the rampant police brutality that was being visited upon the people in the community. And then we fast forward then to 2015 and the uprising that happened in Baltimore as a result of the killing of Freddie Gray. And there was legislation that was put forward to really address the issue of police brutality, to address the ability for the community to have control over law enforcement. And one of those central pieces of legislation were amendments to the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. That piece of legislation didn't get out of committee. And we see a week and a half after the General Assembly was over in 2015, the uprising, and you have the convening of a task force by the presiding officers of the legislature, excluding then Delegate Joe Carter, who had been one of the biggest champions on the issue of police reform. And so the following year, this task force then produces a leadership bill that for me is a quintessential example of interest convergence, right? This notion where liberals tend to put forward things that produce symbolic gestures at best towards change, but keep intact the institutional arrangements that are modeled after the status quo, that keep the same power differential intact. And so the importance of the LEOBR in this current moment, 4 years later, given the gun trace task force, given the police killing of Kareem Gaines, the police killing of Anton Black, that we're now in a moment where the legislature doesn't have very many places to go except for really addressing the LEOBR, which is something that, again, 5 years ago, myself and many others were saying that this is really at the heart of what impedes the ability for true police accountability in the state of Maryland. As a result of the lack of transparency and accountability of police departments, you have officers who, engage in misconduct, and it creates distrust in the community of law enforcement. So the folks who are on the police force, who see themselves as good public servants, people who some folks would say are interested in trying to do good and actually trying to address the issue of violence and homicide in our communities, their efforts are undermined by the lack of transparency, because the deeds of those officers who engage in brutality and misconduct and abuse the community create the distrust that then those who are serious about the issue of public safety, who work within the law enforcement, don't have the collaboration with the community they would need to be able to do something that I think many of us would agree is important, which is addressing the issue of violence and homicide. And so again, often these things are put at odds with each other: the issue of homicide, the issue of police accountability. And I think it's very important to be clear that there's actually a public safety benefit, particularly to those officers that are trying to address the problem of violence, if there are the mechanisms by which the community can hold accountable those officers who betray the public trust and who engage in the kind of brutality that has resulted in the moment we're currently in.